Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome an Infinitive digital hero and also one of Digital Media Wire's 25 executives to watch, Kevin Conroy.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Kevin, it's great having you here. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for being here. You know, one of the things that that video points out very clearly is just the amazing shift in the different tools and technologies and ways that people can actually discover content and engage in entertainment. And I was wondering, with that in mind, can you give us an idea for how you see the television business kind of evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
5 to 10?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll start with the easy questions. I think the great promise of a truly interactive media environment for consumers, it's something that we've been talking about for many, many years. But I think the most exciting thing is that it's actually happening, right? So we are for the first time, by virtue of lots of really fantastic innovation, technologically and otherwise, we're at a place where we're now beginning to actually experience what people have been talking about for decades. Our CEO likes to tell this story. Back in 1953, CBS launched a kids show. And with this kid show, parents could buy a kit, which in the kit there were these special crayons and a vinyl sticky screen that you would actually put on the TV, and the kids would interact with the character in the show. I think it was called Winky Dink. And that was the beginning of interactive television. The good news is we've come a long way in the past 60 years. But I think the thing that people need to really wrap their heads around is that it's evolving in ways that are very different from what I think were originally envisioned. And so whether you go back to the Time Warner tests in the 80s, etc., all of that was centered on this idea that you would interact directly with the screen, and that you would be manipulating between user and the screen. And I think what's happened is that there are layers of experience that are evolving between the user and the screen that are at the user's option. And so I think it's more appropriate to think of this along the lines of a continuum that allows the user at their discretion to interact with media and to go layers and layers deeper. And it's taking the form of not only being able to seamlessly stop and watch. I mean, the idea is the simplicity of being able to pause a piece of programming in one room and being able to pick it up in another room, or being able to pick it up outside the home. There's some very simple pieces of functionality that have actually created huge enhancements with the viewing capability. And who would have imagined that you could have HD experiences on everything from a 4-inch screen to a 60+ inch screen, right? So to answer the question, I think the real final pieces of the equation that'll be filled in the next 5 years or so are the ability for us to finally be able to deliver to a consumer the fluidity that has been so much looked forward to, and the ability to seamlessly interact with that content regardless of environment, device, or platform. And with that come enormous challenges, measurement and otherwise. But I think the opportunity is around dealing with all of this holistically and breaking out of the silos that all of us have been in by virtue of looking too myopically at a device, at a platform, at a screen, and step back and realize that consumers are living their lives fluidly, and the technology needs to enable that, the measurement needs to embrace that, and I think that's where the real win is over the course of the next few years.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, when you talk about kind of the measurement aspect of it, is certainly one of the things that gets me very excited and interested about it. How far do you think we are? How far away do you think we are from really being able to kind of measure the engagement of that audience across those various kind of touch points?
Well, the good news is we're actually very close. You know, there's some work that our company has been doing, that Elizabeth Ehlers, who'll be speaking later, who leads research for our company, has been leading with Nielsen, that are live tests that we've been doing with major advertisers, being able to, for the first time, measure engagement across platforms, et cetera. And I would just point out, one of the slides that went up earlier referenced online. I think it's really important to just talk about digital and stop talking about online or mobile or this or that, because the reality is that online revenue may or may not continue to grow at that kind of rate, you know, over the course of the next 10 years. What we do know is that digital will, and depending upon, you know, what device, what platform, you know, mobile is going to be a big driver here. So we're there actually. We're already doing live tests on both the programming side and the advertising side, and so that, you know, we will in the next few months be able to, for the first time, be able to report at scale on what's happening with programming consumption, viewership across platform, as well as the commercial opportunity.
That's fantastic. And actually, from one thing is measuring it, and then over on the flip side is also kind of trying to be able to sell it, right? So now we've got to try and sell across these different engagement platforms.
Well, so I think what's happened there is that, you know, historically, if you kind of look at buying and selling as one piece and content as the other piece, buying and selling has really grown up by way of proxy, right? So because as an industry we didn't really have a good handle and couldn't get a good handle on exactly who was viewing, you know, the first proxy became demos, right? And then there was an assumption that if someone was watching the programming, they were also watching the commercial. So that was really the second proxy. And I think we've thankfully come a long way since then, so that we're now in a point where we have much better information about and better data that allows us to get deeper into knowing, you know, what's happening there. So that's one piece of it. And then on the content side, really, you know, things like minute-by-minute ratings are something that, you know, we have whole teams that look at that, and that informs important decision making regarding shows. And, you know, we've seen fantastic examples just in the past year of a couple of our, you know, even successful shows. So it's not something that we use only when something's declining. It's a way of enhancing as well. So if you literally go minute by minute, you can see where you're keeping audience, engaging audience, losing audience, and then actually make informed changes in formats so that you can actually fix the things that were slipping. But it also extends to commercials. So historically, you know, people have thought of the A position in a pod being the most important, and wanting to be fair and rotate advertisers through that A spot. But the reality is that maybe a better way, and now being able to really look at performance, maybe a better way to think of it is to reward the most engaging commercial with the A spot, which would both benefit that advertiser, but it also would benefit the other advertisers, because if the A spot performs well, then the subsequent ads will perform well. If the A spot doesn't perform well, it actually has an adverse effect on those that follow.
And it's sort of like having you know, a really good MC before you bring on the feature act. And
that's exactly.
So also, when you kind of think about that, you have that ability to have that influence, and like you said, in near real time, on a minute-by-minute basis, gives you the opportunity to kind of experiment and do things in ways you probably didn't before. But how do you kind of balance that desire to want to take some of those risks and experiment on the digital side, while trying to make sure that you sort of respect the brand that you have in place and that content that you've developed?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, Univision's very unique in that, for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that 92% of our viewership is live. Live viewership for each of the other major English language broadcasters is somewhere in the 60s, 162, 166, 168, we're 92. So with that, we could have taken the view, hey, this is affecting others a lot more than it's affecting us, so we could, we can kind of take our time and see how this plays out. In fact, we took the opposite view, and the view was that this is absolutely the right time for us to be over-indexing on really leaning into everything that the digital landscape has to offer, because we want to make sure that we are more than ready when we start to see more dramatic changes in viewership. And the 92 can be a little bit misleading, because with certain demos, of course, we're seeing different behavior. But as a whole, the vast majority of our viewership continues to be around novellas and live sports, which lend themselves to novellas being multi-generational event viewing, and sports being sports, right? And so, but the other thought is that, at least it's been my experience, that with the introduction of every new platform, and I think you can go back to the 20s and 30s with radio and test this, one of three things happens. Brands that embrace the value associated with new platforms, new technology, have historically grown in value and become more important over time. Brands that have not have atrophied, and some have in fact died, right? But certainly atrophied. And the third is that, without exception, entirely new brands emerge in white space. And so our perspective is that those are historical patterns that we want to not only learn from but benefit from. And I would argue that we're doing 1 and 3. And we're trying really hard to not do 2. And so our view fundamentally is that we want to have a branded content experience in front of every viewer possible, anytime, anywhere, any place. And that is a very real mantra that we operate against. You saw in the clip something called Uvadeos. So we chose to take a very different approach than other media companies, which are extending each of their individual brands to new platforms, so they may have a number of different digital offerings. We chose to create a single aggregated bilingual digital video network, fully bilingual digital video network that aggregates the content from across all 12, about to be 14 of our networks to broadcast the balanced cable. Our view was that the way to win was to create a destination which is now available on 240 million devices. I mean, in traditional web, imagine we're using the word traditional before web. Online web, mobile web, smartphone, tablets, Xbox, Samsung connected devices, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's our effort to extend all the value associated with what have been traditional networks into a digital age. On the other hand, we're also developing new brands. So at the Digital Content New Front this week, Wednesday morning, our television upfront, traditional upfront, is on May 14th. We introduced a new brand called Flama, which is going to be the home of all of our original web programming, meaning made for digital. So the sensibility of that programming, et cetera, is very different than linear. So we've really essentially created an aggregated home for linear content in a digital environment, cross-platform, which we increasingly call transmedia, and then a home for experimentation, which are the examples of sort of extending brand and new brand.
Fantastic. So could you give us a sense for how you're promoting those things, both in terms of from a digital sense as well as maybe from a traditional marketing standpoint?
Yeah, there is some traditional marketing, but I can't think of a digital brand that's been built through traditional marketing. So I don't really look to traditional marketing to be the driver of the creation of digital brands. That's not to say that we're not doing some traditional marketing, because we do have audiences that we want to engage with our new offerings. But I think it has a lot more to do with taking advantage advantage of the unique attributes of social. And you know, in my mind, when you say social, you also have to think about the different layers of social, right? Because people talk about social media as if it's one thing, and it's not. But there are unique attributes. So I think of social as the new search. And so that doesn't mean search goes away, but if you look at sort of the history of discovery, first there was, and navigation, you know, first there was browse, which had its limitations because it can't scale, right? You can't browse through 100 million pieces of video or 100 million pieces of content, which was the importance of search for a decade. And now social blended with search, but even social on its own, is becoming a way of a resource by way of actually both finding what it is that you know you're looking for, but also a form of discovery. And the intersection of social and mobile is really, I think, the sweet spot of where the most engagement is going to come from over the course of the next, you know, let's stay within that period, 5 to 10 years. And that's uniquely relevant for us because, as you may not know, you know, Hispanics way over-index versus non-Hispanics, general market, in both social and mobile. And the statistics are not even close. So you know, 70% of Hispanics own a smartphone. 40% of them are actually streaming video on those smartphones. Hispanics are 40% more engaged in social media on mobile than non-Hispanics. 25% actually follow brands on social. I mean, they're just a bunch of data points that paint a picture of a community that is far more engaged socially in the intersection of social and mobile.
That's terrific. I don't want to completely monopolize the conversation. I think we have time for maybe one or two questions, so I just wanted to check to see if anybody had a question maybe they wanted to ask Kevin.
Lived in South America. I noticed it was really quite a bit different, say, between Santiago, Chile, and Panama and Mexico. How are you handling the cultural differences between the different countries?
So we address that a little bit differently on linear versus nonlinear. So with nonlinear, we have a lot more flexibility to be able to have unique offerings for Hispanics of different country origin. And we actually have products, whether it be local news, and in some cases entertainment and the like, that are distinct offerings based on country of origin. So there's a lot of flexibility digitally to address language differences, cultural differences, etc., and actual content differences. On linear, the reality is that, you know, more than 65% of Hispanics in the United States are of Mexican origin, and so what we find is most of the viewing is coming from an audience that is primarily Mexican Americans, and that really lends itself to the uniqueness of the content relationship that we have with a company called Televisa, which is the largest, you know, producer of programming in Mexico and for large parts of Latin America. So the answer is that our program strategies are uniquely reflect the different segments of the audience depending upon whether it's linear or nonlinear.
Fantastic. We have one over here.
Excuse me. So I really like what you said about the convergence of social and mobile. I think a lot of your content is video. So can you talk to us about how the emergence, or you know, the prominence of social is impacting your video strategy?
Yeah, we do have a lot of content beyond video, but our focus is video. I mean, we've been operating a network of sites that, you know, with publishers and articles, et cetera, et cetera. But we have for the last couple of years, we've been really investing a lot in social capabilities that really start at the point of origin around programming. So we have what we call, you know, they're social media jockeys is the term that we use, actually in the master control room of our networks, and we're creating in real time social engagement. So we're stimulating audiences in real time around what it is that we're airing, and the social jockeys are monitoring in real time what's being reacted to, so that we know how to give direction both on set and with the producers. So there are planned, as I put it into two buckets, there are planned activities. So you may have noticed there was a clip of one of the town halls that we did for the 2012 presidential election. We had one-on-one town halls with Governor Romney and President Obama on a Wednesday and Thursday back-to-back in Miami. And we partnered with Twitter and Facebook for those events, and we really solicited engagement in advance of the event, which then carried into the event. We were doing live questions from the students in the town hall, and then we didn't stop at the end of the town hall. We actually continued to gather all of that feedback and those questions, and we carried it into our news broadcast, primetime news broadcast for the week following, so that we made sure that we answered and responded to all of that engagement. So that's an example of pre-planned, if you will. But then the example of the social media jockey is more real-time across all of our programming, news, entertainment, and sports. Does that answer your question?
All right. Well, you know, Kevin, I know you're going to be around for a little bit longer, so hopefully in between sessions, maybe if somebody has a question or two, they'll be able to catch you.
I welcome it.
And, you know, I can't thank you enough for joining us this morning. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
At the Gold Cup.